Last week, Steve Purcell very bravely told Vision News that he'd been diagnosed with cancer, and he promised that he would keep us in touch with how his condition was developing and what treatment he might need. I'm here to talk to him today. Steve, hello, how are you?
Very good, very good, yeah.
Steve, now that you've been to see your consultant, what did he tell you?
I went to see Mr. Bennett on Tuesday, who's the consultant at the Bournemouth Hospital where I'm being treated, and he told me that he thinks that a nodule is swollen. I'm not quite sure what that is. A node or nodule is swollen, but it wasn't causing any problems. He's going to whip it out anyway, but because it might be cancerous, although he didn't think it was, belt and braces, he's going to put me on an intensive course of chemotherapy for 3 weeks. When you go in, I have to say the speed with which I'm being looked after is incredible, but I've also been given the care of a nurse who is like my liaison nurse, and if at any time I have a worry or a concern, or I've misunderstood something, or I feel I've misunderstood anything, because you do think, well, did he really say that, or was I dreaming that he said that? I can ring up Mike, who's the nurse, and they'll go over again what they've said. I've taken the course of action that I'm not going to look at websites, because when I look at websites or I listen to people talking, it tends to put the willies up me a bit. For example, this morning I was listening to the radio and Lady Antonia Fraser's reading from her latest book, and this morning she was talking about the death of her husband, who's the playwright Harold Pinter, and he died of cancer of the esophagus, which is of course exactly what I've got. And she said that when she looked on the internet, she discovered that there was a 93% mortality rate. Well, I don't want to hear things like that. I want to go with my consultant and hear what he's got to tell me and go with where he is.
In terms of the amount of time it's going to take, how many sessions of chemotherapy do you expect them to call you in to take?
Well, when Mr. Bennett said you were going to have an intensive course of chemotherapy, I thought, well, I've got to go to the hospital every day. It's going to be so time consuming. How am I going to fit it all in? Because I'm feeling already that being ill is almost like a full-time job. But he assured me that I don't have to go once a week and then take it in tablet form. But of course the negative side of chemotherapy is that you just don't know how you're going to react. Some people have no reaction at all. Other people are violently sick and very nauseous, can't do things. Other people lose their hair or whatever. That won't necessarily be a problem for me, but I'm hoping that the story that I hear of that hair grows back again stronger afterwards might take effect.
What has been your experience with the National Health Service in terms of them telling you exactly what your condition is?
I think they're very keen to be open and honest, and they have answered every question that I've asked, and they have not hesitated in telling me bad news, good news, indifferent news.
When you're out walking on your own and you've got time on your own and you're thinking about it, what comes to mind about it?
I think when I'm by myself, I tend to be quite serene. There's no doubt it's a very emotional time, and there have been other things happening within my personal circumstances which have made my emotions go all over the place, so that's added to the complications. But by and large I tend to be quite calm and quite collective and quite matter-of-fact about it, really. But I think after listening to certain things or hearing certain things, you're suddenly aware of how serious this thing is. I think there's part of me which tends to ignore it and doesn't really own it. And part of me which suddenly you're sort of hit in the face. I think when Mr. Bennett told me about the operation I was going to have, suddenly that made me sit up and think, wow, this is fairly serious. He says he's going to take out my esophagus, he's going to cut me from the stomach and the chest and round to the back, and he's going to take out the esophagus, throw it away, and pull up my stomach and then sew that into the bit of the esophagus that's left at the top, and then reshape a bit of the stomach so I've got something to hold some food. And he's explained to me it's going to be a completely different lifestyle that's needed. So it's the fear and the terror of that which you suddenly have a weak moment. And I don't mean weakness in weak in being all sissy. Your resolve disappears a little bit, and you suddenly are faced with the basic truth. I go into the hospital and have the operation, and I think I'm going to then, once the operation is completed, I'm going to go into intensive care for 24 or 48 hours. And he explained to me I'm going to have tubes coming out of every orifice, so it's not going to be a pretty sight for those people who may be thinking about coming to visit me. Then I go into the high HDU, which is highly dependent unit, and I go in there for 3 or 4 days, where obviously things are monitored much more carefully. Then be in hospital probably for about 2 weeks, either in or after that initial period.
Tell me, do you think that all of your friends should muster around you when you're actually in hospital, or do you feel that strong enough to say, actually, do come and see me, but trickle in rather than come and all huddle around my bed?
I think as a former military chaplain, the experience I've had of looking after people who are dying of cancer is extremely moving. I think I was first exposed to it when I was a young chaplain with the Coldstream Guards, and a sergeant developed cancer. He was a very young sergeant. And I spent time with him and his family at his bedside over the Christmas period, and just watched him disintegrate really before my eyes. We'd go in every day with his parents and his family. And it was tremendously moving just to watch him wither away, really, and the reaction of his family and the love and the care. I mean, and there were times when you could see he could cope with visitors, and there were times when he just was out of it and couldn't cope with it. And equally, I can remember fairly recently, in my latter days in the army, dealing with a family whose young baby was dying of leukemia and eventually died of leukemia. And I spent time with them while the baby was dying in Naomi House. And again, that was very moving. And there are times when they want people around them and times when they don't. I've been amazingly well supported by my friends and my sort of adopted family, who have all rallied round and want to nurse me and look after me. And I've got people wanting to jump on trains and fly from other parts of the world to come and live with me and nurse me and look after me when I'm there. So I think the biggest job I'm going to have is trying to manage the people who want to come and visit me rather than worrying about who is going to come.
Steve, having received the news that you'd got cancer, having been with your consultant, an amazing thing happened the following day when you received a telephone call. Tell us all about that.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was at home on the day after having been told that I had cancer. And when I was growing up as a youngster in the church youth club, we used to hang around with two twin girls, a friend and I. And her father happened to be the consultant surgeon down in Boscombe Hospital, as it was then, now Bournemouth Hospital. And then when I came back to the same church to be the curate, he was still there, and of course got to know him even better because he was the lay reader also at the church. Anyway, I hadn't heard from him for 20 years. On the morning after I was diagnosed, I received a phone call from this consultant saying, "Hello, blast from the past." And of course I was very cautious, and I said, "Well, who is it?" And he told me his name, and of course I knew who it was. And I just said, "Well, I just can't believe you phoned. I haven't spoken to you for over 20 years. And you ring on the day after I've been diagnosed with cancer, so I've got some questions for you." And he was very gracious and very good and said we must meet up and everything else. And so if I forget something or if I'm unsure about something, I'm able to ring him up, and that's just a great boast and a great bonus to be able to have.
Steve, let's switch now to you and your faith. It's very important that actually we all continue to believe, as we all do. When you go to bed at night and you say your prayers, what are your prayers saying?
It's quite interesting because I haven't really prayed for myself. I think the only prayer I say for myself is based on that hymn, God be in my head. And so it's a prayer really that God will just be with me through the whole of everything, in my mind, in my eyes, in my thinking, in my speaking, in my heart. Just the presence of God with me throughout whatever I'm doing. I just somehow feel it's wrong to pray for a cure for myself because I'm not convinced that's the right thing. Other people are more than willing to pray for that for me. I wouldn't say that I was being particularly strong or particularly brave. I think I'm being me. And I guess that has come from life's experiences. I had my parents abandoned me when I was a child, so I didn't know who my parents were, etc. And I think that builds in a natural resilience. You get a natural inner strength by that. And then, of course, there is the faith aspect. There is the sense in which, I'm in God's hands, and that's that trust. So no matter what happens to me, there is that strength, that faith that God's there and supporting and upholding, and that goes on, beyond this life into the next. So, if you've got that faith, death really ceases to be fearful. But it doesn't mean to say you don't have your moments. I do have a quiet weep sometimes because life is so great and there's so much that I'll miss about it.
What is your message to people who find themselves in a similar situation? You've been terribly open. You're very content to talk about it, and I suspect that actually that's helping you as well. Do you have a message for people who've got cancer, who discovered like you that they've got it for the first time?
I don't think it's for me to tell other people how they should respond to news, good or bad, that they hear. But for myself, I find it very therapeutic talking to people. And I'm very much want to be open with everybody. I want everybody to know the truth. I don't fear that cancer is something to hide from. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that other people should be disgusted by or worry about. It just is. And the more people I talk to about it, the better I feel within myself.
What's your message to all of your pals who are desperately keen to know how you're getting on and who are out there supporting you in their minds?
For somebody in my position, the prognosis couldn't be more positive, and I think that's what we've got to hang on to. But the other thing is, if I do die, I've been preaching about the resurrection of the dead for almost 30 years. I can't suddenly abandon all that now, and I do passionately believe it, and therefore death doesn't frighten me, but the way of dying might frighten me a bit.